W19 Culture Change, the Lumorous story. Andrew Cole, Chief HR/Organizational Development Officer. An organization isn't yet ready for total openness and accountability. Culture work may be needed before OKRs are implemented. As Jim Collins observes in Good to Great, first you need to get the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, and the right people in the right seats. Only then do you turn the wheel and step on the gas. Not too long ago, a leader in value-based healthcare stood at a crossroads. Lumorous is a St. Louis-based technology and solutions firm that provides software, services, and know-how to healthcare providers and payers. Its clientele ranges from university hospital networks to traditional insurers. The company had started in 2006 by partnering with a group of 200 St. Louis area physicians through a federally regulated insurance company, Essence Healthcare, to serve 65,000 Missouri seniors with a Medicare Advantage plan. Tapping into a vast trove of patient data, Lumorous helps partner organizations convert traditional, fee-for-service, volume-based sick care into something else entirely, a healthcare delivery system that incentivizes prevention and discourages needless tests or detrimental hospital stays. Under this value-based model, primary care doctors take responsibility for their patients, cradle to grave. The goal is to improve quality of life while conserving precious resources and dollars. At Lumorous, they've shown how those objectives can work hand in hand. According to CEO Mike Long, the moonshot goal is to rationalize the nation's healthcare supply chain. In every other industry, success is based on transparent cost, quality, service, and the availability of choices. None of those principles work in healthcare, because the system is completely opaque. Doctors have difficulty knowing what services are requisitioned on your behalf, much less what they cost. So how then can you hold them accountable for financial outcomes? It's a transformational challenge, and Lumorous, aided by OKRs, is leading the charge. Given its reliance on transparent data, Lumorous seemed a natural fit for Andy Grove's goal-setting system. But as Andrew Cole, the former head of HR, will tell you, adaptation was anything but simple. If cultural barriers go unaddressed, as Andrew says, the antibodies will be set loose and the body will reject the donor organ of OKRs. As an experienced architect of sweeping organizational change, Andrew was the right person in the right seat to make sure the OKR transplant took. Andrew Cole, when I came to Lumorous, they had been working with OKRs for 3 quarterly cycles on paper. They had an outstanding employee participation rate, or so I was told. But after a deep dive analysis, I realized the process was superficial. At the end of the quarter, a lone HR person ran around like a Jack Russell, nipping at managers' heels to get updated numbers before the board meeting. People dropped into the software platform, conveniently adjusted an objectives metrics, and said, "Oh yeah, I got that done." They'd slap on a date and check off a box. It looked great on PowerPoint, but it wasn't real. Few of our people understood the business rationale behind OKRs. We were missing explicit buy-in from executive leadership. Most of all, nobody held anybody accountable for getting the system right. When I examined people's objectives, they weren't connected to the actual work. I'd go to managers and ask, "Why does this show up in your OKRs?" In many cases, they had no idea how their objectives linked up to what we were working to achieve. It was so much window dressing. I try to understand an organization before I charge in, breaking things. But 2 quarters later, I still wasn't sure the OKR process could be saved. In a closed board session, I asked John Doerr, "If I don't think this tool is right for us, then we won't do it, right?" And he said, "Absolutely." By then I'd diagnosed our root problem, a passive-aggressive approach. No one had addressed a basic question everyone at Lumorous was asking, "What's in this for me?" Though the OKR program was sincerely intended to improve goal setting and collaborative communication, people didn't trust it. Unless we changed the environment, it couldn't possibly succeed. Transformation doesn't happen overnight. The executive team had brought in OKRs to help integrate 2 clashing internal cultures. Essence, the health insurance company formed by the St. Louis Doctors Group, was risk-averse. Per Hippocrates, Lumorous pushed to the edge to find the next big tech and data insights. Essence nurtured a proprietary model within a hyper-competitive industry. Lumorous took those learnings and shared them with the world. As demand for our services began surging, this culture gap was slowing us down. In May 2015, 11 weeks after I arrived, we announced a total reorganization under the Lumorous umbrella. One company, our reasoning went, should have one name. I knew that OKRs could eventually be our lingua franca, a way to connect everyone's goals, but that would need to wait. Without cultural alignment, the world's best operational strategy will fail. HR transformation people watch what you do more than what you say. Lumorous had some senior leaders with an old-school, autocratic approach. They weren't living our core values: ownership, accountability, passion for the job, loyalty to the team. Nothing else would matter until those leaders exited the organization. We made sure they left us with their dignity and respect intact, a telling moment in any transformation project. At each and every culture meeting, we told our employees, you have the right, no, the obligation to hold your executive team accountable for what we're saying our culture should be. If we're not following through, make an appointment or send an email. Or just walk up to us in the hallway and tell us we are not getting it done. It took 3 months for anyone to take us up on our invitation. Our CEO, Mike Long, engaged with a lunch group and said, why would anybody want to work in an environment with a fear of holding each other accountable? That was a powerful inflection point, and people began to believe. But culture change can be very personal. It took one conversation at a time to convince our employees that collaboration, shared accountability, and transparency would be rewarded. And to show they had nothing to fear from the new Lumorous. HR can be a potent vehicle for operating excellence. It's also the place where culture change is crystallized at the end of the day. Culture is about the people you recruit and the values they bring to bear. While Lumorous had its share of A and B players in middle management, there were also C players and below who'd been hired with erroneous criteria and vague interviews. There is no tool, OKRs included, that will work with the wrong instruction manual. Time is the enemy of transformation. We took less than 18 months to replace 85% of our HR professionals. Once senior management and frontline employees were fully on board, we tackled the tougher nut, strengthening middle management. That's typically a 3-year process, from start to steady state. When it's complete, your new culture is assured. Objective Institute, a culture that attracts and retains A players. Key results: 1. Focus on hiring A-player managers/leaders. 2. Optimize recruitment function to attract A-player talent. 3. Scrub all job descriptions. 4. Retrain everyone engaged in the interviewing process. 5. Ensure ongoing mentoring/coaching opportunities. 6. Create a culture of learning for development of new and existing employees. OKR resurrection. Late in 2015, I asked my HR team to dissect the company's earlier stab at OKRs. If we were to make another go of it, we'd need to retrain everybody in the company, and I meant everybody. We wouldn't get a third chance. The following April, we relaunched the platform with a 60-day pilot program for 100 employees in our operations group. Our senior vice president for operations and delivery had his doubts going in. But with sharpened training, plus improvements to the software, he became an enthusiast. Within less than 2 weeks, he was shooting emails to the pilot group. Why did you write this objective that way? What's the metric here? I don't get this OKR, it isn't what I'm seeing from client feedback. And his people were thinking, he's paying attention. I'd better look at this more closely. Winning our troops over to OKRs wasn't easy or instantaneous, far from it. Transparency is scary. Admitting your failures visibly, publicly can be terrifying. We had to rewire people from how they'd been raised since kindergarten. It's like your first scuba dive, when you go 35 feet down and the adrenaline is pumping and you're scared out of your wits. But when you come back up, you're exhilarated. You have a new insight into how things work beneath the surface. It's no different plunging into OKRs. Once you start having honest, vulnerable, two-way conversations with your direct reports, you begin to see what makes them tick. You feel their yearning to connect to things bigger than themselves. You hear their need for recognition that what they're doing matters. Through the open window of objectives and key results, each of you gets to know the other's weaknesses with no worry of getting caught out. For managers, one particular benefit of OKRs is to lead them to hires who can compensate for their own limitations. Our people stopped dancing around their setbacks. They began to realize there was no shame in trying your hardest and failing, not when OKRs help you fail smart and fail fast. The tide turned. We began hearing comments like I was a complete naysayer, but now I see how this can work for me. 98% of the pilot group became active users of our OKR platform, 72% set at least one objective aligned to the company's goals. And 92% of the pilot group said they now understood what my manager expects of me. Transparency without judgment. By then I was working with Art Glasgow, who came on board in the spring of 2016 as our president and co. The two of us agreed there was no point to OKRs unless we went all the way. Art volunteered to be executive sponsor, our goal-setting shepherd. He stood up in front of an all-hands meeting and said, OKRs are how we're going to run the company, and we're going to use them to measure your bosses. That was the carrot that balanced the stick. Art's role in the crusade cannot be overestimated. He set the tone for what he calls brutal transparency without judgment. And he made my job less lonely. In Q3, as OKRs were rolled out to all 800 Lumeris employees, we created our own coaches training program. Over a period of 5 weeks, our reinvented HR department worked overtime to meet with every single manager, more than 250 of them in classroom-size groups. We held open houses for them to come and talk to us one-on-one, and we told them up front there were no dumb questions. Those sessions became a golden opportunity. They were instrumental in building engagement and motivating people to deliver against expectations. Goal setting is more art than science. We weren't just teaching people how to refine an objective or a measurable key result. We had a cultural agenda, as well. Why is transparency important? Why would you want people across other departments to know your goals? And why does what we're doing matter? What is true accountability? What's the difference between accountability with respect, for others' failings, and accountability with vulnerability, for our own? How can OKRs help managers get work done through others? That's a big factor for scalability in a growing company. How do we engage other teams to adopt our objective as a priority and help assure that we reach it? When is it time to stretch a team's workload or to ease off on the throttle? When do you shift an objective to a different team member, or rewrite a goal to make it clearer, or remove it completely? In building contributors' confidence, timing is everything. There is no handbook to address these questions. The wisdom resides in leaders with personal connections to their teams, to managers who can show what success looks like and know when to declare victory. My advice: not too soon. Our training investment paid dividends. In Q3 of 2016, our people's first full crack at the system, 75% of them created at least one OKR. Our retention numbers began moving in the right direction. Lumeris has fewer involuntary exits these days. We're hiring the right people and keeping the ones who can thrive here. Selling your Reds. Shortly after arriving, Art held a full-day, off-site business review for the Lumeris leadership team. Now it's on the company's monthly calendar. When our top-line OKRs are projected on a screen, it's clear to see which leaders are making their objectives. Art doesn't like yellows, so every OKR is either green, on track, or red, at risk. There's no bell curve ambiguity, no place for problems to hide. The reviews run for 3 hours, with a dozen senior executives taking their turn. Little time is spent on people's greens. Instead, they sell their reds. The team votes on the most important at-risk OKRs for the company as a whole, then brainstorms together as long as it takes to get the objectives back on track. In the spirit of cross-departmental solidarity, individuals volunteer to buy their colleagues' Reds. As Art says, we're all here to help. We're all in the same bathwater. As far as I know, selling your Reds is a unique use of OKRs, and one well worth emulating. Today's transformed Lumorous values interdependence. It prizes intentional coordination. OKRs make you focus on working on the business, instead of just working in the business, says Jeff Smith, Senior Vice President for U.S. Markets. Our regional market heads are quarterbacking opportunities versus running them solo. We're moving from hero culture to team culture. Smith was happily surprised to find the operations and delivery team tying their objectives directly to Smith's sales goals. In the past, Smith said, you'd hear things like, I'm in delivery, you're in sales, just do your damn job. Now it's more like calling in a wide receiver to run a play, I'm here, let me help you. That was a result of the OKR process I never expected. First, Lumorous needed to nurture the right culture for OKRs to take root. Then it needed OKRs to sustain and deepen that new culture, to help it win people's hearts and minds. That's a campaign that never ends. Lumorous Physicians and Leaders, 2017. Rear, Dr. Susan Adams, CUART Glasgow. Front, Dr. Tom Hastings, CEO Mike Long. By all the metrics, 2017 was a banner year for Lumorous, now the market leader for value-based care. The market's starting to shift, Art Glasgow told me. For the first time I feel like our sales plan could start to get realistic. I might actually have to put in some stretch goals. As of this writing, Lumorous has launched partnerships with payers, provider groups, and health systems in 18 states, accounting for more than 1 million lives. The potential is staggering. If adopted nationwide, the company's Missouri model could save up to $800 billion annually in wasteful medical expenditures. Most important, it would enhance our nation's quality and quantity of life. At today's Lumorous, OKRs are part of the wallpaper. As Andrew Cole might say, once people experienced the new company under the surface, they couldn't resist the temptation to keep diving back into it. W20 Culture Change, Bono's One Campaign Story. Bono co-founder EVE just seen how OKRs can lock in culture change post hoc. As Bono's story shows, structured goal setting can also springboard an enriching cultural reset. For nearly 2 decades, the world's biggest rock star has waged an experiment in anti-apathy on a global scale. Bono's first big, hairy, audacious goal came out of the Jubilee 2000 Global Initiative, which led to $100 billion in debt relief for the world's poorest countries. 2 years later, with the startup grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Bono co-founded Data, Debt, AIDS, Trade, Africa, a global advocacy organization for public policy change. Its declared mission was to address poverty, disease, and development in Africa in alliance with government bodies and other multinational NGOs. Bill Gates would say it was the best $1 million he ever spent. In 2004, Bono launched the One campaign to catalyze a nonpartisan, grassroots, activist coalition. It's the outside-facing complement to Data's inside game. From the time we first met, I was struck by Bono's passion for factivism, or fact-based activism. In one's hard-headed, analytical, results-oriented environment, OKRs were an easy sell. For the last 10 years, they've helped clarify the organization's priorities, a tall order when your mission is to change the world. According to David Lane, the organization's former CEO, we needed a process of discipline to keep us from trying to do everything. As one has grown, it has leaned on OKRs to achieve fundamental culture change. It is pivoting from working on Africa to working in and with Africa. As David told me, there's been a dramatic philosophical change in how people think about helping the developing world develop itself, to empower these countries to grow on their own. OKRs played a key role in how we did that. To improve the lives of the world's most vulnerable, one has helped deliver nearly $50 billion in funding for historic health initiatives. In addition, it has lobbied successfully for transparency rules to fight corruption, and to channel resources from African oil and gas revenues into the war on extreme poverty. In 2005, alongside Bill and Melinda Gates, Bono was named Time magazine's Person of the Year. Bono, we had big goals for you too from the start. You could say megalomania set in from a very early age. Edge was already an accomplished guitar player and Larry was a pretty good drummer, but I was a poor singer and Adam really couldn't play the bass at all. But here's what we thought, we're not as good as those other groups. So we better be better. We weren't as polished or accomplished as the bands we'd go and see, but we had chemistry, whatever the thing is that makes it magic. We thought we could blow up the world if we didn't blow ourselves up first. We felt we could go all the way. The other bands had everything, but we had it. That's what we used to repeat to ourselves. How did we measure effectiveness? Well, at the outset, we asked questions about our place in the world, beyond the pop charts or the clubs. Like, can our music be useful? Can art inspire political change? In 1979, when we were just 18, one of our first jobs was an anti-apartheid show. Another was a pro-contraception show in Ireland, that was a big deal. Later, in our early 20s, we deliberately became a nuisance to what you might call Irish terror groups and all the people who felt ambivalent about them. We felt compelled to say that blowing up kids in supermarkets can never be right. We gauged our political impact by the torrent of bile that came back at us. U2's 360 Tour, 2009. And then at some point, you want your songs to chart. We worked quite hard to break through to the mainstream, actually. We were a live phenomenon, but our singles didn't do very well. So we judged our success by selling tickets, and then by selling albums. Picking our fights when we formed our non-profit Data, we went about it exactly the same as I had with U2. It was a band, Lucy Matthew, Bobby Shriver, Jamie Drummond, and myself. We didn't know who was the singer or the bass player or the drummer or the guitar player. But we knew we weren't a bunch of hippies and wishful thinkers. We were more punk rock. We were tough-minded opportunists. We were working on a single idea, debt cancellation for the poorest countries. We were good at that, choosing one fight at a time and going at it with a vicious schedule. Then we went after universal access to anti-AIDS drugs, another clear goal, and I must say, people did laugh in our face, you are out of your tiny mind. That's impossible. Why fight the most expensive disease when you could have a go at malaria or river blindness? Or finish off polio? And I remember saying, no, we're picking a fight with this disease because these two pills it's one pill now are a visual representation of inequality. If you live in Dublin or Palo Alto, you can get the pills. If you live in Lilongwe, Malawi, in Africa, you can't get the pills. So because of an accident of longitude and latitude, you live or you die. That doesn't feel right. Anyway, I was sure we could win that argument, because everyone knew such inequality was wrong. It was that simple. That was years before we used OKRs, but even then I used to say, picture Everest, then describe how difficult the climb is. Then describe how we're going to reach the summit. Like Everest, beating AIDS looked nearly impossible. First you needed to be able to describe it. Then you could climb it. So now it's 2017, and 21 million people are accessing the antiretroviral therapies. It's amazing. And AIDS-related deaths are down 45% in the last 10 years. New HIV infections in children are down by more than half. And we're on pace to win the fight against mother-to-child transmission by 2020, to finish the disease off. I believe we will live to see an AIDS-free world in our lifetime. Growing up with OKRs, our NGO band was entrepreneurial in spirit, and we tracked our goals internally. But you can only go so far without process. Once we started to have real impact and real access, data merited more data, more measurable procedures, more measurable outcomes. Then we brought 11 different groups together to form a coalition behind the one campaign. We had so many brilliant, gifted people, but our problem was way too many goals. A green revolution in Africa. Girls' education. Energy poverty. Global warming. We were all over the map. Data and one merged two very different cultures. It was tricky. We realized we were ourselves lacking in transparency. If you don't have clear sign-offs to your goals, you get overlap and dissonance. People get confused about their jobs. For a time we had a real schism in our organization. Here's the thing, we never thought small. The stretch was always there. But our goals were so gigantic that we stretched too thin and got people worn out. OKRs saved us, really. Tom Freston, chairman of one's board, saw their value, so they became part and parcel of the operation. He played a very important role. OKRs forced us to think clearly and agree on what we could achieve with the resources we had. They gave us a frame to hang our passion on. And you need that framework because, without it, your brain is just too abstract. The OKR traffic lights, the color coding, they transformed our board meetings. They sharpened our strategy, our execution, our results. They made us a more effective weapon in the fight against extreme poverty. The pivot: when John Doerr arrived at our very first one board meeting, he asked a simple and profound question: who are we working for? Who's the client here? We said, John, we're working for the world's poorest and most vulnerable. And John said, well, then, do they have a seat at the table? We said, of course, the whole table's there for them. But John persisted, which was important: can you visualize that person? Shouldn't we think about them physically being at this table? That's the thinking that seeded the pivot that eventually transformed our organization. One. John's prodding rhymed with a man we met in Paris once, a man from Senegal. He said, Bono, do you know the Senegalese proverb, if you want to cut a man's hair, it is better if he is in the room? He said it in a loving way, but we didn't miss the message: be careful if you think you know what we want. Because we know what we want. You're not African, and this Messiah complex hasn't always turned out so well. In 2002, in Southeast Africa, I had seen people with HIV queuing up to die. Along with many other AIDS activists, I sent up dramatic flares about the scale and devastation of this pandemic. I encouraged everyone in our organization never to say the word AIDS without adding the word emergency. The AIDS emergency. By 2009, though, there was backlash. Some more well-heeled Africans took exception to the way we were characterizing AIDS, though we were right. An economist named Dambisa Moyo wrote a book called Dead Aid and led the charge among those who were thinking, shove your aid. We don't need it. It's doing more damage than good. We're trying to rebrand the continent as a positive place to invest and live and work. You're hurting that. I could see that one's credibility was under threat here. We had focused on governments in the north because decisions in Washington, London, and Berlin had big consequences for many of the poorest countries. Jamie and other activist friends, like John Gethongo, Ori Okolo, and Rakesh Rajani, were on the ground reminding us of the same thing. Africa's future had to be decided by Africans. We had called our organization One, yet we were only half the people necessary to fix these problems. It was fantasy to think those north of the equator could end extreme poverty without a full partnership with those south of the equator. One committed to both organizational and cultural change. Even now, we're still increasing our collaborative work with African leaders, grassroots, grass tops, and all in between. We've established a growing African office in Johannesburg and around the continent. The OKRs have kept us focused on the concrete changes we need to make: hiring staff in Africa, expanding our board, reconnecting with old Jubilee partners, and identifying new networks to turn to for advice. I guess we've become better listeners. And I don't think we could have done it without objectives and key results. Objective: proactively integrate a broad range of African perspectives into one's work, align more closely with African priorities, and share and leverage one's political capital to achieve specific policy changes in and toward Africa. Key results: 1. 3 African-based hires complete and on board by April, and 2 African board members approved by July. 2 African Advisory Board in place by July and convened twice by December. 3 Relationships fully developed with a minimum of 10 to 15 leading African thinkers who actively and regularly challenge and guide one's policy positions and external work. 4 Undertake 4 participatory trips to Africa over the course of 2010. Measuring passion. Having Sudanese businessman and philanthropist Mo Ibrahim on our board is just transformative. In Africa, he is the real deal, a proper rock star. He and his daughter, Haydeel, give us the intellectual static on the continent that we were missing and that was so necessary to tune into stronger channels. Before we met him, Mo was properly rude about some of our objectives. He steered us to transparency as a central goal not just in Africa, but in Europe and America. We put in the research and found that corruption drains $1 trillion a year from developing countries. This is more important than HIV/AIDS, Mo told us. This will save more lives. With the impetus coming from Africans, once change has progressed. We lobbied side by side with the Publish What You Pay collective, and now it is illegal for any company on the New York Stock Exchange or in the EU to conceal what they've paid for mining rights. And last year, Aliko Dangote, whom I've heard dubbed the Bill Gates of Africa, joined the board. That's all well and good, but we've also got to be straight about the facts. For example, as of December 2017, one has 8.9 million members who have signed up online or have taken part in at least one action. Over 3 million of them are now in Africa. And I can see Bill Gates rolling his eyes and saying, "Big deal. Signers are not members. They're just people who sign something." He's correct, of course. But that led us to a question: how do we measure membership engagement? And whatever metric we come up with, is the number static or can it grow? We needed to prove that we could take people from signers to members to activists to catalysts, so we found ways to thank and reward our members for doing more than one action. We flooded the districts of certain U.S. senators and congresspeople, and it became unnerving for them. For example, if you ask Kay Granger, a Republican congresswoman from Texas, she probably thinks there are people in one t-shirts everywhere, pressing her to take a stand. But we're not everywhere. She was one of our strategic targets. And she really came through for one. Bono brings the One campaign to Dalari, Nigeria, to visit internally displaced persons camps, 2016. Nobody has ever before measured activists' passion. It sounds odd, but it's totally OKR. So you're passionate. How passionate? What actions does your passion lead you to do? And now when Bill Gates asks tough questions at our board meeting, we can bring out our OKRs and say, here is what we've done, and this is the impact it's had. An OKR framework. Is there a downside to OKRs? Well, if you read them incorrectly, I suppose you could get too organized. One mustn't get institutional, we need to stay disruptive. I'm always scared that we're going to go corporate and try to beat every quarterly goal. We needed John to remind us, if everything's at green, you failed. That was counterintuitive for a lot of people, especially now that we're financed up and have the best and the brightest working here. But John kept saying, more red. He was right. We needed more big ambitions because that's what we're good at. We're less good at the incremental stuff. One isn't standing on our passion. We're not standing on our moral outrage. We're standing on a foundation built on certain principles, and with walls and floors with a certain structure of thinking from the OKRs. And for that, we are very, very grateful. It takes intellectual rigor to effect change, it requires very serious strategies, indeed. If the heart doesn't find a perfect rhyme with the head, then your passion means nothing. The OKR framework cultivates the madness, the chemistry contained inside it. It gives us an environment for risk, for trust, where failing is not a fireable offense, a safe place to be yourself. And when you have that sort of structure and environment, and the right people, magic is around the corner. And so, Edge was a really talented guitar player from the start, but I wasn't the best singer. Adam wasn't the best bass player. And Larry was just getting there as a drummer. But we had our goals, and a rough idea of how to reach them. We wanted to be the best band in the world. I-21 The goals to come. What keeps me going is goals. Muhammad Ali Dias are easy, execution is everything. If you have read this far, you've seen how OKRs and CFRs help organizations of all stripes and sizes move mountains. You've heard first-hand accounts of how they inspire workers, develop leaders, and unify teams to do great things. By measuring what matters, objectives and key results are helping Bono and the Gates Foundation mobilize against poverty and disease in Africa. They're driving Google in its audacious 10x quest to make the world's information freely accessible to all. They're empowering the pizza savants at Zume to deliver a robotically assembled artisanal pie, hot and fresh, to your door. And here's what's exciting, I think we're just getting started. OKRs may be called a tool, or a protocol, or a process. But my image of choice is a launch pad, a point of liftoff for the next wave of entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs. My dream is to see Andy Grove's brainchild transform every walk of life. I believe it can have a huge impact on GDP growth, healthcare outcomes, school success, government performance, business results, and social progress. We're getting glimpses of that future through forward thinkers like Orly Friedman, who has introduced OKRs to every elementary school child at the Khan Lab School in Mountain View, California. Imagine you are 5 or 6 years old and setting your own goals for learning your own objectives and key results, as you learn to reason and read. I'm convinced that if structured goal setting and continuous communication were to be widely deployed, with rigor and imagination, we could see exponentially greater productivity and innovation throughout society. OKRs have such enormous potential because they are so adaptable. There is no dogma, no one right way to use them. Different organizations have fluctuating needs at various phases of their life cycle. For some, the simple act of making goals open and transparent is a big leap forward. For others, a quarterly planning cadence will change the game. It's up to you to find your points of emphasis and to make the tool your own. This book tells a handful of behind-the-scenes stories of OKRs and CFRs. Thousands more are just getting started or have yet to be told. Moving forward, we're going to continue this conversation at whatmatters.com. Come see us there. And you can join the discussion by emailing me at john@whatmatters.com. My ultimate stretch OKR is to empower people to achieve the seemingly impossible together. To create durable cultures for success and significance. And to prime the pump of inspiration for all the goals, especially your goals that matter most. Dedication. His book is dedicated to 2 extraordinary people who left us, too soon, within a span of 4 weeks in 2016. Andy Grove, the brilliant originator of the OKR, is remembered in fair detail in these pages. Coach Bill Camel's wisdom is invoked more fleetingly. Here, then, is our opportunity to celebrate Bill, a man who gave so much to so many. From his gift for honest, open communication to his zeal for data-driven operating excellence, the coach embodied the very spirit of OKRs. So it's only fitting that he graces our close. On that clear April morning in Atherton, California, it took a big tent to hold Bill's funeral mass on the Sacred Heart playing fields, the place he'd spent so many Saturdays coaching 8th graders in flag football or softball. More than 3,000 mourners turned out, from Larry Page and Jeff Bezos to generations of the, once, young people who'd played for him. Bill had embraced every one of us with his unabashed bear hugs and selfless guidance. And every one of us believed that Bill was our best friend. His life was the biggest tent of all. The son of a gym teacher who worked nights at the steel mill in Homestead, Pennsylvania, Bill first earned his sobriquet in the 1970s as varsity football coach at his adored alma mater, Columbia University. But coach became the coach when he traded the gridiron for an even more competitive arena, namely the boardrooms and executive suites of Silicon Valley. He was a world-class listener, a Hall of Fame mentor, and the wisest man I've ever met. His ambitious, caring, accountable, transparent, profane humanity built the culture at Google and dozens of other companies to what it is today. As Ken Auletta wrote in The New Yorker, in the world capital of engineering, where per capita income can seem inversely related to social skills, Campbell was the man who taught founders to look up from their computer screens. His obituary was not featured on the front of most newspapers, or at the top of most technology news sites, but it should have been. We first met in the late 80s. I was recruiting a CEO for one of my most famous failed ventures, the Go Corporation, a pen-based tablet computer company. Bill's joke was that we should have called it Go, Going, Gone. He came recommended by Deborah Radabaugh, the top executive recruiter in Silicon Valley, and by his old marketing boss at Apple, Floyd Kwame, whom I'd recruited to Kleiner Perkins. The deal was sealed when I visited Bill's team at Claris, the Apple software subsidiary. I'm usually quick to judge whether I'm ready to get into trouble with an entrepreneur, though it may take a while longer to persuade them to get into trouble with me. Claris had such great esprit de corps, and such obvious esteem for Bill, that I was sold on the spot. Bill Campbell with his signature beverage for executive coaching sessions, 2010. When Apple and John Sculley refused to spin off Claris in an IPO, as Bill believed had been promised, he took the job at Go. Though our business model flopped, we had a fabulous time together. Before Bill, Go's executive team would preface every vote with a heated argument over strategy, making for winners, losers, and general hard feelings. After Bill became CEO, all of that changed. He'd sit with individual executives and ask them about their families, and tell a story or two in his colloquial way, and gradually he'd learn how they felt about the issue at hand. He had a remarkable way of getting people to agree in advance before they came into the room, and soon there was no more voting at Go. For Bill, it was always about the team, the company. He was devoid of private motives or agendas. The mission was paramount. Bill was a master leader who developed great leaders. 5 of his direct reports at Go became CEOs or CBOs of their own ventures. I backed every one of them, and every one of them turned a profit. Among many lessons, Bill taught us the importance of a team's dignity, especially when a company fails. After Go sold out to AT&T, we made sure that those who were let go had great references and found good homes for their careers. In 1994, I brought Bill back with me to Kleiner Perkins as an executive in residence, installed him in the corner office next to mine, and promised to find another company for him to run. Around the same time, Intuit founder Scott Cook decided to hire a CEO. Once I introduced Bill to Scott, it took them one walk around Bill's neighborhood in Palo Alto for the coach to get the job. He and Scott built a tremendous relationship and a spectacular company. Early in Bill's 4-year Intuit tenure, he faced a crisis. Revenues were lagging to the point where they were going to miss the quarter. We had a blue sky, visionary board of directors that was pushing to invest more capital and power through the shortfall. When the board met in a hotel suite in Las Vegas, the coach wasn't buying it. "Cut the crap," he said. "We're going to cut back and lay some people off. We're going to get leaner because we've got to make the numbers. It's part of the discipline and the culture I want." Bill felt strongly about delivering results for the shareholders, but also for the team and the customers. As we polled the room, however, more and more directors came out for spending and plowing through. Bill looked more and more distraught. When it came around to me, I said, "You know, I think we should go with the coach." I wasn't sure if he was right or wrong, but I thought it was rightfully his call. My position turned the tide. Later, Bill told me how much what I'd said had meant to him, and that he might have resigned had it gone the other way. From that point on, we had an unbreakable bond. We could disagree and say some pretty harsh things, but the next day one or the other would call to apologize. Both of us understood that our loyalty to the relationship, to the team outweighed any differences. Bill was still at Intuit when I recruited him for the board at Netscape. Soon he was my first call whenever I backed a new entrepreneur. It became our MO, Kleiner invests, Doer sponsors, Doer calls Campbell, Campbell coaches the team. We ran that game plan again and again. In 1997, Steve Jobs returned to Apple in the most amazing non-hostile takeover of a public company ever, without putting up a penny. Steve asked for the resignations of all but one of Apple's directors, and then he called Bill Campbell to join his new board. The coach refused to be paid for this work. He was giving back to the valley that had done so much for him. When a few companies prevailed upon him to accept stock, he funneled the proceeds into his philanthropic organization. In 2001, after helping persuade Google's founders to hire Eric Schmidt as CEO, I advised Eric that he needed Bill as his coach. Eric was a rightfully proud man who'd already served as CEO and chairman at Novell, and my suggestion offended him. "I know what I'm doing," he said. So it wasn't love at first sight for him and Bill. But in less than a year, Eric's self-review showed how far he'd come around. "Bill Campbell has been very helpful in coaching all of us. In hindsight, his role was needed from the beginning. I should have encouraged this structure sooner, ideally the moment I started at Google." Bill considered his Google mandate open-ended. He coached Larry Page and Sergey Brin and Susan Wojcicki and Sheryl Sandberg and Jonathan Rosenberg and Google's whole executive team. He did it in his characteristic style, one part Zen and one part Bud Light. Bill gave little direction. He'd ask a very few questions, invariably the right ones. But mostly he listened. He knew that most times in business there were several right answers, and the leader's job was to pick one. "Just make a decision," he'd say. Or, "Are you moving forward? Are you breaking ties? Let's keep rolling." When it came to Google's OKRs, Bill paid closest attention to the less glamorous, committed objectives. A favorite piece of coaching, served with his typical dash of salt: "You've got to make the effing trains run on time." As Google CEO Sundar Pichai recalls, he cared about operating excellence day in, day out. It went back to Bill's deceptively modest-sounding motto, "Be better every day." There is nothing more challenging or more fulfilling than that. The coach was the eminence grise at Google's Monday executive staff meetings, our unofficial chairman of the board, if you want to know the truth. At the same time, he served as lead outside director on Apple's board, which for anyone else might have presented a conflict. It drove Steve Jobs crazy, especially after Android emerged to challenge the iPhone. Steve harangued Bill forever to choose Apple and leave Google, but the coach refused. "Steve, I'm not helping Google with their technology. I can't even spell HTML. I'm just helping them be a better business every day." When Steve persisted, the coach said, "Don't make me choose. You are not going to like the choice I'm going to make." And Steve backed down because the coach was his one true confidant. He kept Steve Jobs going, as Eric Schmidt told Forbes. Bill was Steve's mentor, his friend. He was the protector, the inspiration. Steve trusted him more than he trusted anybody else. Though the coach knew more about technology than he let on, he'd never Bigfoot engineers or product developers. His superb insights were about leadership, about what made business teams and people tick and how to protect your people from getting steamrolled by your process. If he saw someone treated unfairly, he'd pick up the phone and call the CEO and say, "This was a process error." And he'd fix it. People are discouraged from bringing love into business settings, but love was Bill's most distinguishing trait. I can still picture everybody's face lighting up when he'd walk into a meeting at Intuit. Sometimes it was love by faux insult. If you came to work in an ugly sweater, he'd ask, "Did you roll some guy in the restroom to get that thing?" But you always knew the coach cared. You always knew he had your back. You always knew he was there for the team. You don't find many leaders who can convey love and fearless feedback at the same time. Bill Campbell was a tough coach, but he was always a player's coach. More than most in our circles, he got family. He was absolutely the happiest when out coaching his daughter Maggie, and my daughter Mary, in softball. He'd be on the field at 3:20 sharp, no matter what big meeting was starting someplace else. And you'd never find the coach distractedly checking his cell phone in the 6th inning. He was completely present. He sparkled in that setting. Even after he got sick, Bill never stopped coaching. When I decided to take on the chairmanship of Kleiner Perkins, his advice was a big factor. With my 2 daughters off to college, the time was right. The coach knew I wouldn't be slowing down or moving upstairs. I'd take the job to accelerate what I loved doing, finding and funding the best entrepreneurs, and helping them build great teams as they scaled. It was my chance to become a player coach for the next generation of leaders and partners. To follow Bill's lead. A few months before he died, in a podcast with my Kleiner partner Randy Commissar, the coach explained that he always wanted to be part of the solution. People are the most important thing that we do. We have to try to make them better. Bill is gone, but for his many hundreds of disciples, all the executives he coached over all those years, his work goes on. We're still trying to get better every day. I miss you, Coach. We all do. John Doerr, April 2018. Coach Bill Campbell, 2013.